I'm Josh Gonzalez, and welcome to Mind Meld. This is a podcast where I have in-depth conversations with some of the brightest people in the known universe. My aim here is to spark deep conversations around interesting topics to find the tools, tactics, and philosophies that we can all use in our daily and creative lives. In this episode, I'm joined by Bram Kanstein. Bram is an early-stage startup expert and currently runs an online course called No Code MVP, where he teaches over 250 students about the mindset, process, and tools to validate their startup ideas without needing to know or even learn how to code. Bram is a non-technical product builder himself who already had 3 of his products acquired. One of these products is called Startup Stash, which is a curated directory of tools and resources for startups, which you can find at startupstash.com or go to the direct link in the description of this podcast. In this episode, we talk about his philosophies on validating your idea and the exact methodology of how to validate your business idea without sinking too much time, money, or effort into it and then having it fail later on. And as an added bonus, we talk about how you can do all of this without even needing to know how to code. This will be a particularly interesting episode if you're looking to start a software product, an online course, or really any kind of product or service that you think other people might find valuable. This is all about validating your idea that you have in your head with real users out in the wild. And I'm hoping that this serves as sort of a guide on how to find your first 100 customers or users and whatever it is that you're trying to do. Bram and I talk about a lot of different tools and resources in this episode, so if you're looking for direct links on anything that we talk about, go to the link in the description of this podcast to find detailed show notes and links to the things that we talk about. I make very detailed show notes on every episode, so you can find that on my website at joshgonzalez.com/podcast. And if you find this episode helpful, useful, or even just entertaining, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app of choice so you can get notified when new episodes go live. So let's get right into it. I'm Josh Gonzalez, and this is Mind Meld with Bram Kanstein. Well, Bram, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. This is fantastic. It's so cool to have you on here.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the invite. Or well, maybe I invited myself. I don't know. I saw you on Twitter and I checked out what you did and I thought, I think I sent you like, hey, if you're looking for any guests, maybe hit me up. So here I am.
Tell me a little bit more about No Code MVP, how you started it and where it's going right now, because I think it's like a really good alternative to, doing the traditional startup route, which is, you find a technical co-founder, you code your solution from scratch, whereas you're just telling people, hey, you can use these no-code tools and, you can validate your idea first and then you can go build your thing. So I'd love to hear like how it started and how the idea came.
I think there's different like angles or little seeds that eventually ended up in creating the course. I've been working with startup entrepreneurs for the past 5-6 years, and I've ran into people on multiple occasions that were either non-technical or technical, doesn't really matter, but and a lot of people do this, they build the idea that's in their head, right? So they have an idea in their head, they think this is an amazing idea, I should do something with this idea, and then they just build what's in their head. And what you usually then get is a solution, right? Like the problem that they built, looking for a problem, i.e. looking for people who have a problem. And I've never seen that work. And if you look back at the lean startup methodology, like how that started, right? One of the first things they say is like, get out of the door, talk to people, etc. And there's still not that many people that actually do that, right? Like that, who value their idea as a combination of assumptions. So maybe it's good to explain, like when you ask someone to pitch their idea, they will probably pitch, I'm building this product for this and this person, and it does this and this thing to solve that and that problem, and I'm going to make money by doing or charging X, right? And so in this pitch, there are all these assumptions. You know who has a problem, you know what their problem is, you know how to solve it, you know what to build to facilitate solving the problem, and you know how to earn money. If you don't have the right mindset, you will think that all these assumptions are true, and that's when people start to build out their idea. But the mindset that you have to follow is that, ideas are shit. They are probably worthless. They are worth zero. And you have to go out there to prove that there is some substance and truth in, this combination of assumptions that you made. And what I really believe, and it's my belief, but I can also quote Paul Graham, famous Paul Graham. He even says, that first part of a startup idea, you have to do that yourself. It's a company defining exercise. That's literally what he says. As in, if you do that manual and shitty work in the beginning to find evidence that supports your idea, that tells you, hey, this is something that you should pursue, then you will be so much more in control when you try to find a technical co-founder or start building your own product, or when you brief a third-party development agency, for example, that eventually builds out your idea. And so that's kind of the mindset part where I started thinking like, hey, there is no real combination in a product or a program. Like I see a course as a product where it combines mindset, methodology, and the practicality. So methodology for me is Lean Startup or my application of Lean Startup. And the practical part, I'm facilitating with no-code tools. So basically, if you have a website builder that you can connect to any tool through Zapier, right? So if you have a website with a form that you connect to Zapier, which is an automation tool, and then save the form entries in Airtable or a Google Sheet, then you have a product, right? That's a functioning product. You're capturing data, you're transferring it, you're storing it, and then you're doing something with that data. And so for me, for most startup ideas, let's say 70, or sometimes I say 80+% of startup ideas, right? So marketplaces, online services, on-demand services, stuff like that, you can facilitate that first part with no-code tools. And that'll help you move fast, learn fast, and also in a fast and cost-effective way, figure out if an idea has any merit, if you should pursue it or not. And so that's kind of where I started. And eventually that culminated into a course called No Code MVP. And currently I'm teaching over 250 people how to build and validate their startup ideas without code. So it's been super fun to see who is joining the course. And it's been a fun ride.
That's awesome, man. So who are the type of people that are joining the course and how are they finding you? Is it you outreaching to them? Is it them looking to just build ideas? And also like, just for like people listening, like we're talking about software here. Like we're, I'm sure you can use this idea with anything. This is like, you're talking about web apps, maybe even mobile apps. I'm sure, but the methodology I think is what's really key here. And I'd love to dig into that later. It's just like, you can use tools that are already made to sort of like build stuff. It's like using Lego essentially, right?
Yeah.
But what I really want to know is like, who are these people? What are some things that you've seen people create, and like what has really kind of blown your mind that you've seen? Like, have you seen anyone create stuff that you're like, oh, I didn't think that's even possible? And do you see people like surpass your expectations?
So there's a lot of questions in there. Let's start with what type of people join the course. So my assumption was that 1% of all people are able to code, right? To write software code. But I believe that not all great ideas are obviously with this 1%. So my goal is to show and teach the other 99%, right? So more product people or business people, or let's say people that have been in an industry for 10 plus years. They see this problem, but they have no clue how to start solving that through web tech or software, to help them take those first steps up until the point where they can objectively say, hey, this is something I should pursue or not. So I'm focusing on these people. There's one guy who joined the course, and I asked everyone like, why they joined the course, and he sent me this message like, hey, I have this idea. I already spent 2 years and 100 grand on this idea, and I haven't earned anything up until now. And I did a total reflection on what I did wrong, and I see it now, and I see that your course or your approach is something that I should follow to still see if it has any merit or not. And to me, later we talked, it was so interesting. Like, this is not a dumb guy. It's a smart person. He has a in general, a good idea, but he just took the wrong first steps, and then he followed that road, and that road ended up in burning 100K with no users and customers. But still, it's not a dumb guy. And so those are really the people that I want to help, like show them a certain mindset and the approach and the practical tools that they can use. And on the other hand, I think 25% of all members are developers, actually. And so when I ask them, like, hey, why did you join the course? They tell me, well, I can build anything, which is my superpower. But it's also my trap, because when I have this idea in my head that I'm already convinced is a great idea, I just do what's natural to me and most comfortable, building stuff. Right? It's the most comfortable thing you can do. I mean, we could jam about ideas for the next 15 minutes and have fun and whatever, but it's not building a company or figuring out if your idea has any merit is a super uncomfortable thing to do. So people avoid that, naturally. And so all the developers who've joined say, I have built way too many things for no one. Right? I launched to crickets, or I wasted too much time on the wrong idea just by building the thing. And so they really see that they have to shift their mindset from could I build this, where the answer is mostly yes, to should I build this, where the answer for most ideas is probably no. And it's fine that the answer is no, but you don't want to waste too much time in figuring out that it's a no, right? So you have to adopt a certain mindset and framework to get to that no as fast as possible. And if that no turns out to be a yes, then awesome. And if it's a no, write down your learnings and move on to the next idea, basically. And so, I started with non-technical people, but I see that technical people also see, the value in that. And it's what you're saying. It's that methodology, it's that approach, how you value ideas, and the steps that you take to investigate that idea. And you ask, like, hey, what did people make? A lot of people have asked me that, like, what's the best MVP that you've seen? The fun thing here is that if you do an MVP right, not everyone sees it. Only the people you want to target, right? Your focus customer segment, they will see the MVP. And so an MVP is, repeatable, but it should also be, simple enough to be thrown away. So to be honest, I've only seen like 3 MVP sites, and I haven't seen any other MVP sites, also not tweeted or whatever. So I actually think that's a good sign. Why would I see a MVP site that's focused towards, I don't know, horse owners?
Right.
It's not relevant for me.
Totally. I guess I just thought within the group, like, do you guys share your MVP sites with each other?
Yeah, people share it, and it's the fun thing is it's not really about the end product, the MVP. It's more about approaching that process. So I host a Telegram community for the students. So I think a little less than half, like 40% of all people are in that group. So almost 100 now. And most people ask questions more about, like, hey, I'm approaching it in this way. What do you guys think? And then, people challenge each other on that approach, and not as much on what they actually built, because I think that's also something that I really believe is that a product or a first product is just a vehicle through which you deliver value, right? So if you have a problem or a need, you want to have that problem solved or that need fulfilled, and you want to find people that have a hair on fire problem, right? So if your hair is on fire, you just want the fire to go out, but you don't really care, like, how I do that. Basically, you would accept a brick.
I love that.
No, but that's like the urgency.
It's
that's
so
like
true.
the urgency you want to find people that have that urgency. So it doesn't really matter if your first product, I honestly believe this, if it's purple, pink, lime green, whatever. And my analogy here is delivery of a pizza. If I want a pizza, I want it within time frame X, right? At the right temperature and the right taste. That's the value that I'm looking for. And how that pizza gets to my door, if it's a guy who's walking or on a bike or a scooter or a truck or whatever, I don't care. The oven, type of oven, specifics of the oven, I don't really care. I just want that pizza, right? And I think it's the same in the early stages of ideas. I mean, I showed so many people that the MVP that they thought they had was already like a version 2.0, and the MVP is literally them sitting at a table with their possible customer on the other side of the table, them doing some stuff on their MacBook, giving them value, i.e. some data or whatever, and then get money, cash money from that person. To me, that's like true MVP.
100%. Like, one thing that totally blew my mind is, like, your MVP could literally be an Excel spreadsheet, right? It could literally be just a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be a website. It's the same data. You're just kind of putting a different skin on it, right? Like, you the first thing that I seen that you posted was Startup Stash, and I'm sure it didn't even start as a website. How did you start that?
Excel sheet.
It's a spreadsheet. Yeah.
And a newsletter. Yeah. And so the example I just gave with sitting on a table, 2 sides of each other, actually is a real story that I tell a lot. So I used to work as a consultant, like an innovation / startup coach consultant at a big bank. And there were these three guys who created this model in a spreadsheet. And the model could take any address of a commercial real estate property in the Netherlands. And through this model, spit out two data points. One, acquisition price of that object. And two, the rental price per square meter. Right? So that was the value that they would deliver. Two data points within X time, but it was super fast, like within a minute or something. So super fast, they would give you two data points, and they knew that those two data points were really important to real estate investors in their decision to invest in a property or not. So they created this Excel sheet. I wasn't with this project at that time, and they won this hackathon, whatever. They were working together with Deloitte or one of the big five, companies. They were creating this mobile app so the investors could walk on the street and take a picture of a property and get the data and super fancy stuff. And so I think there between 1 and 2 million euros went into this app, and like 8+ months, whatever. And they didn't get it off the ground. It was struggling. And at one point, I sat at the table with them and I asked them, does the model work? And they said, yes. So I asked again, can I put in any address and it gives me the data? They said, yes. And then I asked them, like, okay, but have you sat down with actual real estate investors on one side of the table and they on the other side of the table? They give you an address, you give them the data, they give you cash money, and then see if it has any value, because your assumption is that that has value. No. And so I asked them, okay, could you please go out and do that? So they did it. What they ended up with was the real estate investors telling them, okay, this is pretty cool, but it's my job to go out to the street where the property is. I walk around the neighborhood, try to get a feel of the neighborhood. I grab a cup of coffee on the other side of the street and try to think of which store to put in this object. And so they saw that as work. That was their work. And the solution of this team took away their work and they didn't like it. So even though they got these two data points within 1 minute, they didn't see any value in that because they just enjoyed their work, and they would have gotten to almost, the same valuations or numbers anyway. And so when I experienced that really showed me that, it's sometimes it's just as simple as that. Because if the real estate investors would have said, hey, this is pretty cool, then they should have talked to more real estate investors, right? Or would have said, for the next 50 properties, you send me the address, I'll send you the data for free or a discounted amount or whatever, and do that, let's say 1,000 times. And then from those 1,000 manual, quote unquote, transactions, you would have the specifications for your app or maybe a web platform or maybe an SMS text line, whatever, right? So the decision for an app was already so huge that it didn't really connect to the reality anymore. And so, this example I tell all the time, because for me, this really shows me, as complex as your possible product can be, you have to just start really simple and see if the value you provide makes any sense for anyone.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of these products are, they're calling it SaaS, which is software as a service, which is really the automation of your service. And a lot of the MVP could literally be, as you're saying, manual work. It's a service. Start as a consultant or a freelancer, figure out the problems of those people, then you automate it. It seems like really productizing it is just automating a process.
Totally. I totally agree. It's automating the process plus a friend of mine calls this like plumbing, user accounts, dashboards, permissions to view this or that or whatever, right? Like that's kind of what a SaaS looks like. But at the beginning, and it doesn't really have to be huge, right? Like I just said 1,000 times, but depending on a certain idea, it could also be 50 times. If your idea is a SaaS to, there's this company called Baremetrics. I don't know if you know them. Like they create dashboards for your Stripe account, right? Early MVP for that could be, like, hey, just send me your raw data. I'll make the dashboard. Does this make any sense? Does this bring you value, right? And if you do that 50 times for 50 different people, you'll have enough evidence to figure out if you should pursue that idea or not, right? And so for me, it's important to it's really my goal, right? To show people that this is the way to approach it. Because if you approach it in this way, you'll do the manual shitty work, which gives you feedback or in itself. And if you time box it, right, if you say within 2 months, I'm going to investigate this idea in this way, then you give yourself this like objective playing field, I say, to have an objective discussion after 2 months, asking yourself or maybe your teammates or whoever you're doing this with, okay, I did this, I gathered this info, what does it say, right? And if you then come to the conclusion that an idea doesn't have any merit, it's fine, right? Because it didn't become too big. And to refer back to when we started, if you have an idea in your head and you build the solution instantly, it's already too big. There's money, time, ego involved. And then, you have this loss aversion going on.
There's this attachment to it for sure.
Yeah, that it's more comfortable to just dabble with it, and see if it works. That, giving up on it hurts much more. That's what the loss aversion is about.
Yeah.
And so people don't really do it because it's an uncomfortable thing. But for me, it's a super comfortable thing. Like, you saved yourself time. And if you write down 2 or 3 learnings and you go on to a new project, then, all those learnings will compound over time. And with your 10th project, whatever, you'll go through this whole process so much faster. So it's not only about finding the failing ideas fast, but on the other side, of course, finding the ideas that have merit. So you should pursue them.
Totally. And they'll always morph and change, right? Like, you can find something that works really well and then be like, oh, and if we did this a little bit differently, it can be a totally different idea.
Yeah, totally.
Especially during these days with, everything moving online and people trying to virtualize every single thing due to the coronavirus outbreaks all around the world. People are figuring out, how could we, again, this is a problem that you can kind of think of, and maybe we can kind of like jam this out of how we could kind of solve this. People are saying, okay, we can't go to conferences, we can't go to events. How do we bring that online? And the MVP is like, just host a Zoom call. But that's kind of like boring, It's like, but it works. It totally works. And then I guess out of that, you would just speak to the attendees, be like, hey, what do you want? How could we make this even better? Then you make it even better. Then eventually maybe you have your own web platform because Zoom doesn't do X and you need to have X.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is you can like always combine these. You're talking about like Zapier and these automations and the plumbing. And this is kind of where I want to get into. Maybe this is more on the technical and tactical side of things. Whereas like most people are solving these small problems. There are these tools that solve a lot of the problems that you're even having that you want to use to create another solution for another problem. It's kind of weird. It's like, It's like, they're solving a problem to solve more problems.
Tools for tools.
Exactly. Totally. I mean, you can always overdo it. There's a lot of people kind of overdo it on the tools, but it's this idea of the plumbing that you said, you always need to have some kind of like user authentication. People need to be able to log in. You have to be able to save passwords, save data. And there's these tools out there that already exist that, solve all these problems. And I guess going into the tool side now, what have you found to be sort of like, on the top tier of that, the plumbing? I know there's a couple things like Outseta and a few other platforms out there that we can kind of name drop, but I know there's a lot of companies here that do that plumbing for you so you can get to that MVP even quicker without investing a lot of time and money. You're just kind of like playing like Lego. You're putting bigger blocks together or putting like the wheel on a car instead of trying to manufacture every little part of the car. You can find the pieces and put it together. Yeah.
So for me, there's two things that come to mind. One is, and they launched that last week, is Stripe just added, I think it's something like a billing feature or something, like where your customers can change their card and their email and their subscription and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. And I also really like MemberStack. I think it's memberstack.io.
Yes.
I mean, they basically fixed that part. And I think to refer back to something that you said earlier within this question, for me, it doesn't really matter which tools you eventually put together, right? Like, people have to try out different tools and figure out what they like, what works best for them, like create their own little stack of tools, basically. And for me, it's the best sign is that you run into problems with that stack. So, for example, if your stack breaks because there's too many people or these people want features that you don't have, to me, it's funny because if I look on Twitter, there's this discussion, around no code tools and whatever, like what's the scalability and stuff like that. Like,
right.
Try to break your first solution, and then we'll talk about scalability, right? Like if you break that first solution, that's fucking cool. Like you're doing something right. Like there's actually people that want this, the solution that you're offering or the value that you're trying to deliver. So, and even then, if there's, let's say, 1,000 people in that no code solution, that's nothing. So what are 1,000 people? Like you can manually email 1,000 people or talk to them, whatever. So you can solve that for them. Even when you say, okay, I'm happy that you're happy with my solution. I know that it sucks right now. It's a good thing. I'm going to translate this into a custom code, SaaS product, whatever. Please bear with me, but we'll get to it. Like how much more validation do you need than your solution breaking?
Totally. And a lot of the times people don't even know. They're not going to go around in your back end. They don't really care about the tools that you use to build it. If it looks good, like good enough and it works, I think that's all that really matters, right? Just like you said, it needs to just solve their problem.
Maybe it's fun to share. I have this idea for a SaaS together with a friend. He's a developer. And so we were obviously thinking about, okay, how do I eat my own dog food in, validating a SaaS idea of my own. And so our idea here is we found this company in LA called GumGum. It's gumgum.com. And I think they do $100 million a year revenue. And what they do is they analyze videos like YouTube and TV. So for example, if you watch the Kardashians, their system can see, oh, this is the car they're driving. These are the heels they're wearing. These are the shades they're wearing, whatever. And so they recognize the brands and they recognize people. And so eventually they created this tool to help brands give them insights into, where they are mentioned or shown. So it's like a market research or like an R&D tool. And so we were jamming on this type of product, and eventually, so I'm doing this with Andrew, who's technical, and he's into machine learning and AI, stuff like that. So eventually we came up with like, hey, could we do this for podcasts? So could we scan the top podcasts in the world, transcribe the text, analyze with our own models to see not only what are these podcasts talking about, but what are millions of people listening to, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so eventually we want to, the SaaS is a searchable database of, hundreds of podcasts each week. So we cannot build that tomorrow. So how do we start? So we're focusing on one category, which is business and entrepreneurship. We're starting with like 25 or maybe 50 podcasts. And we're just going to start as a newsletter. So we're going to run these podcasts through our system. And then each week we're going to send a newsletter. I think there's like 7 like topic categories, from like brands to people to places, something like that. And then for each category, we'll have a word cloud and then 3 topics that stand out to us. And that's just what we're going to show. And attached to that, we're going to link each week to an Airtable database with all the raw data, like the consolidated raw data. And in an Airtable database, you can filter, you can search. We have the categories, etc. So it kind of emulates where we want to go, but it obviously has restrictions. And literally, our goal is we want to, because we don't exactly know who this will be for. So we're going to launch the newsletter for free. We're just going to show, all the data. And our goal is to find the people that break the Airtable and then email us and say like, hey, I want to do more with this. So that is basically our MVP. And so, if that's 100 people, then good sign. If that's 5 people, then bad sign. We cannot really build a scalable product for 5 people.
Right.
So that's our approach there.
That's awesome. That's a really cool idea. I love the idea of like, I think this will be the future, because people are saying, like, these are big minds saying that, audio is sort of the next really big wave, which I think we're on that wave. Like more people started podcasts and have been listening to them during coronavirus because no one's commuting or anything.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a need for podcasting tools. But then it's also like, okay, we're talking about all this stuff, but none of this is searchable, like on Google or anything, unless you manually transcribe it, right?
Yeah, totally.
So, I mean, Google just launched their Google Podcast platform not too long ago. And you can only imagine what they're doing. Like they obviously want to organize the world's data. So I can imagine that they're going to be analyzing every single RSS feed and podcast that's uploaded and connected to Google Podcasts. And they're going to do something similar. Because for me, one of the biggest things for me that takes the longest for my podcast, I know you do
show
one
notes.
as well. Do show notes, man.
Yeah.
Automating show notes. And then there's also another cool feature in Google Podcasts that like gets rid of any blank space. So like in between us talking, if like there's a little bit of a
awkward silence.
Awkward silence. It just gets rid of that. That'd be cool to have that. Getting rid of any oohs or ums. Like maybe you can like feed it in a word and say like ooh, and then like it just gets rid of that or oohs and ums. I think like that's definitely the future for like the creators of like how do you now automate your transcriptions? I mean, there's some apps that sort of do it, like Soundtrap
or Descript. Descript is pretty cool.
Yeah, there's some cool ways to do it, but then it's like you're going from the other side of like people searching it, right? It's like, are they going to be searching for what's happening in there?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is, let's say this becomes a searchable database. So the name is Topic Base. So for anyone who wants to follow, at Topic Base. But for me, it would be like one search bar, and you just enter, I don't know, Coca-Cola, and then you would see just a feed. So you would see consolidated data within a time frame. So last month, Coca-Cola was mentioned X amount of times. This is the, like stuff like that, just general stuff. And then below that, how I'm seeing it right now, would be a list of all the specific episodes where Coca-Cola was mentioned. You can click through, because, the cool thing about podcasting is that it's all RSS. So everything, the show name, the episode number, the episode name, the episode URL, like all these things you can get from the RSS feed. So that's kind of how I'm seeing that end product. And it's fun because now I'm also thinking about it. And with Andrew, who I'm working with on this, we jam about it. And then we have to, at one point, we just say, okay, let's check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. Let's just stop. Let's just stop jamming about this end idea. Let's focus on actually finding people who would care about this idea. And so that is our biggest challenge. And
so what are you guys doing? Since you obviously teach it and you have some ideas. So what do you do for first step? How do you find your first 5, 10 or 100 users? Like what is your sort of process on that?
Yeah, so it's going to be a newsletter. Like I said, it's going to be a weekly newsletter with all these word clouds in there with a link to that Airtable. So basically that's the MVP. And to launch it, we're just going to go really broad, like Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, just Product Hunt, Hacker News, whatever. It's just, we're basically casting out a net. And this doesn't work for every idea, by the way, right? Because our biggest unknown is, who is this for? We don't know these market researchers or these R&D people, but we know there are similar products, like I mentioned, the Gum thing. There's also explodingtopics.com, and they look for like social media, Reddit, stuff like that, or meetglimpse.com. So there are products that facilitate these people, but I don't know who these people are. So that's our goal, is finding these people. So we're casting a wide net to see if we can narrow down on that. So the goal is to get as many subscribers as possible, basically getting in touch with them, seeing, what's your role, like why would you find this useful, and then see if we can learn from them. But yeah, that's our approach. And I just refer to like horse owners. If you have an MVP for horse owners, you would probably not cast a wide net. You would go to, local stables, or find a horses subreddit, or a horses Facebook group, or a horses physical meetup, or, whatever about horses. So it's totally dependent on the customer segment that you're targeting and the thing that you want to figure out, basically.
Totally. And then there's like another aspect of it. As you were saying this, I'm also thinking about like timing. Like, you're not going to build apps for Neuralink right now, Elon Musk's Neuralink, because it's not out yet.
Yeah.
But then how do you find like the balance? Like for me, I'm creating a tool for virtual reality content. And it's like, there's some days where I'm like kind of doubting myself. I'm like, am I too early? But like, there's still millions of people using VR, but maybe they just want the gaming aspect, and we're doing more like entertainment. So is it at a certain point where like maybe your failure is more about timing, and then you're like, hey, let's spend it?
Totally. Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, spend a few months on it. It doesn't work now, but bank it. So how do you think about banking ideas rather than just completely getting rid of them?
That's a super personal question, right? Like, it's a personal and contextual question, basically. And so
right.
I always see this as, when you start with an idea, you basically have 3 elements. I always see it as time, money, and your motivation. at the beginning, your motivation is obviously high, but time wise, right? Like I mentioned, I would always time box the investigation of an idea. Let's say 3 months. You just start with 3 months. And you can say, okay, I'm going to spend, my budget is, I don't know, 500 euros or nothing, whatever. Doesn't really matter. But there's a budget. 0 is a budget too, right?
Yes.
And so you start with that. And then over time, the idea is that if you are not satisfied with the evidence that you're finding, right, is no evidence, basically, is when you're not satisfied. These 3 elements will deplete, right? The time will deplete, the money will deplete, and the motivation will deplete, unless you get satisfied in certain areas, and then you will become more motivated, or you will have signals that tell you like, hey, I could be onto something. And then after that time frame, after 3 months, you stop, you have the conversation like, hey, what happened? Should we pursue this? And then it happens again, because then you can say, hey, okay, we're going to pursue this idea for another 3 months. Maybe your budget is now, 1,000 euros and motivation is at level, whatever the level is. And so over time, if your motivation is too low, or there's not enough money, or you don't want to spend any more time, or you feel like you don't want to commit time to an idea anymore, then you really have to question, is this something that I still want to work on? But if you have signals, because your question is about banking an idea, right? Putting it on, in the fridge, basically, and waiting for the wave to happen. I don't know, man. Because if you see a trend or have an idea in a certain space, there will definitely be other people that also look at that space, right? You're never the one person in the world who sees a trend. I don't really believe that. So
there's even like scientific evidence where if like one person on one side of the world has an idea, there's a really, really good chance that someone on the opposite end of the world who doesn't even know or speak to that person has the same idea at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because, again, ideas are assumptions, but where ideas come from for me is, experience, things you read, things you listen to, things you see, where, it's all these little tidbits combined are eventually an idea. So if you think you're too early, let's say you can find 0 people in the world that would be remotely interested, that's a big signal to just quit with an idea, obviously.
Totally.
But let's say you find, I don't know, 1,000 people on your mailing list, or 500, and you have really great conversations, but you feel that it's not the right time, then you can bank it for a while, but you also have to adjust your expectations for that idea, because you not working on it means you're going to pick it up later. Other stuff will happen. Other people will also see the trend. So stuff is going to happen. So to refer back to your question, I don't know if banking ideas really works, basically. Because
interesting.
I'm also just thinking out loud. But the most successful companies were like on the wave before it was a wave, right? And they were there when the wave hit, basically, and surviving that before the wave hits part is, I think, what the startup journey is all about. So that's why you see some people consulting on the side and stuff like that, just to buy time to wait for the wave. And
I love that. I love that analogy for sure.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I see it. And VR is a wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a small wave or a big wave, depends on your bubble, obviously.
Of course, exactly.
But yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe some type of product has to be introduced into the market, like a cheaper, HTC Vive or a cheaper Oculus or whatever to get that adoption of the hardware basically going. Could be something like that. So
you just have to be, I guess, you have to just stick with it if you do believe in it, I guess. I mean, for me, that's like, I am sticking with it. I'm doing almost exactly as you said, doing consulting on the side and other things, maybe a different side project to keep that thing going. Because that's exactly what you said. Like, how do you buy time? Well, I mean, unfortunately, like what you want to do with these products is like, you don't want to sell time for money, because that's like not the best way to build wealth. But like you said, you have these 3 things. You have like your motivation, you have time and money. And it's okay, well, you have as much motivation and time as you want because you're waiting, and you're motivated because you believe in it. But the money starts depleting. How do you start bringing it up? So it's like, in my mind, I'm seeing these as like 3 like health bars. Like if you're thinking of this as a video game, and your business just needs these 3 health bars, time, money, and motivation.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a really, really good analogy in any kind of business, because your business is always going to make or spend money. You're going to have time of people working on it, or amount of time that it's going to go and it's going to pass. And there's motivation of the people that's working on it. And I think, like, I'm reading a book right now called The Buddha and the Badass by the founder of Mind Valley. I highly recommend it.
Okay, cool.
If you're interested in, like, leadership and sort of this molding of, like, the Buddha mindset and the badass mindset, the spirituality, and then the badass startup disruptor. And it's all about giving people that motivation. Like, you have this vision that's going to be like, 10, 20, 50 years out. Like, look at SpaceX. Like, their mission that we all believe is, like, they're going to bring us to Mars and we're going to have a different colony on Mars. But what do they do today? They're just basically a vertical trucking company. They just ship stuff out to space. Nothing too sexy there, but they have this vision, something long term. And then you have to do sort of like this boring stuff in the meanwhile, which, like you said, could be consulting, it could be freelancing. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. That is an MVP within itself.
I think so too. Yeah. But still, you have to stay objective, right? Because you can fuel the. I should write a blog post about this. I mean, you can fuel the time with your motivation, right?
Right.
Because if you think this is an amazing idea, should I be working on this? Okay, I'll give it a little while, even when there are no results, for example. So you can fuel your time with motivation, but there will become a time where the time is up, basically. Right. So sometimes I see people who work on this idea for 4 years, no traction. And I'm just like, wow, you're way too smart to spend all this time on this idea. Like, just wrap it up, write down your learnings and move on, right? Or sometimes I see people who say, like, yeah, I've been working on my MVP for 2 years and I'm ready to find any customers. I'm like, oh my God, it's this isn't really the right approach. But I think the longer you linger with a project that doesn't give you, that doesn't fuel the money, the time, or the motivation with something really objective and from really your customer segment, then you should really think about, okay, if I pursue this or bank this for a while, what are my expectations then, right? Because then I think the way you look at the time and money and the motivation will change a bit. I'm also thinking out loud, so I hope this makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't want to linger too long, right? So what's the concrete evidence you have that banking this is fine, and you'll get to how to identify the point where you pick it off the shelf again and start working on it.
Right. And it's almost like catching that wave.
Yeah.
It's like you have it ready to go. So maybe that's what it is. You're like, hey, I know this wave is coming. I want to build this for now. But I think you're right. Like, you have to time box it. And then in that meantime, you can't completely just bank it. You have to go out. If you're not like working on the product and putting money into the product, you have to put the time in. Yeah. Like you said, doing the boring manual stuff of going out and just like, manually messaging people on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, and finding those people, then be like, hey, look at the landing page. Does this even like resonate with you? They're like, I don't even know what you're trying to sell, man. I have no idea what this thing even is.
Yeah.
Then you go back and you just kind of reiterate. But I love that idea, man. And it's like, with your sort of mindset, it's like, it doesn't matter how many ideas you have, you can almost spend a certain amount of time on one. If it works, keep it going. Great. Maybe even hire people to keep running it. If not, go to the next thing. And you can build out these models super quickly. And that's sort of the beauty of no code. You're not spending months or years trying to develop this perfect thing. It's like you're getting the MVP. What's the most minimal viable product? And then you're doing it without code and just like simple things that you could just do. And you can just validate it so quickly.
Or not, which is good. And the fun thing here is that validation is not about proving the assumptions that make up the idea that they are right. That is not the goal. Your goal is to prove that they are not wrong. So that's
right.
That's a different way to look at it. So the assumption is wrong by itself, right? And your goal is to show that it is not wrong, because an assumption is just, again, a combination of just thinking and things. And until you have shown that it is not wrong, it is a threat to your idea, right? And yeah, in that way, you will never get the idea off the ground. Does that make sense, right? So an assumption is always, I can get this data, or people have this problem, or I can reach these people in these places. And if they are not wrong, they still are a threat to your idea. So then you have to wonder, okay, is this something that I should spend time, money, or my motivation on?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to keep that mental model with me and use that for these sort of journaling. So you always talk about too, like, going back on these ideas and sort of writing about it and what do you learn. So do you have a tool or a specific way that you kind of journal on these, or almost like you're kind of writing like almost a database of this idea? Do you have like a certain framework for like how people should be thinking about their idea when they're going back to like look on it and they're trying to sort of, they're trying to bank these ideas, even if it fails? Like how would you log them? How would you create a log? Like it could be obviously like an Airtable database or whatever, but like how would you think about logging your failures?
That's a good point. I actually never did that. It's funny. Like last week, I met this guy who sold like 2 companies, whatever. He's incredibly rich. And we were talking. We were having this cup of coffee, and he had this notebook, and he was just writing in his notebook. And this notebook was full of just meeting notes. And it got me thinking that any person I've met who is way well off, they have a notebook for meetings. They don't even. They just write it down to process it, basically, or they write it down to listen to you and then reply with their idea that they wrote down. But documenting all these inputs, I can imagine they also kind of journal in it a bit, like their own thoughts. It's something that I really want to do, and I've never done. So my answer to your question is basically it's all in my head. But that's not the right approach. I don't think that's the right approach. But yeah, maybe to share, because so in my course, I'm teaching mindset, the framework, and the tools. And the framework that I teach in depth, I also made available for free. So I called it the MVP Canvas. And people can find that at themvpcanvas.com. They can download it for free and use it like it's a Google Sheet or an Excel or a numbers file or a PDF. And they can use it to take their big idea and turn it into an MVP that they can start testing tomorrow. So maybe that's fun to check out, because I think you also write down the results of your MVP experiment on there. And yeah, you can document those, as you said, in an Airtable or just in a Google Sheet or a Notion, whatever, to see like, hey, how did this idea go?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm glad that you brought up Notion, because that's been sort of my everything tool lately. And I think it's just such a great way. Like, you're creating this like personal wiki, essentially. You can create these. I do my daily journaling in there. Any meeting notes I do in there. Although I do agree having the notebook is a little bit easier to write down. You're not like typing and stuff. So sometimes I will take my meeting notes and then put it into the Notion, which is great because I have it available to my whole team. The great thing about having these network tools is like sharing of the ideas. Like it's great for you just to go back and look on them, but what's almost better is having other people be able to see what worked, what didn't, almost like an Airtable or a database of like ideas that failed, and then, timestamp it. Okay, it didn't work during that time. Okay, this Bitcoin thing didn't work out. Yeah, because no one was using Bitcoin.
But 8 years later, yeah.
Exactly. And then looking back on it, like, holy shit, now that could be great. Or like, ideas, I bet you there are ideas that came out in the 1950s that would be like perfect for today. Like, but stuff that we would never even think of.
Dude, there's so many of those ideas. I mean, 2 weeks ago I tweeted that Quibi, Quibi, that new platform, is like the 2020 version of Webvan, which not a lot of people know, but like Webvan was online startup in 1999 that delivered groceries, right? Like it was a digital supermarket, like an online supermarket. Like now, that's totally normal. But at that time, people thought it was weird that you would, order an orange or a cucumber that you didn't held in your hands or smelled or looked at or, whatever. And so eventually, this was a big failure, right? They raised, I don't even know, like hundreds of millions, and their turnover was $600,000 or something like that. And so they blew up. But I think, that idea is, for one, an example of how not to approach it. If you Google for, Webvan story, you'll find that they just really fucked up. But also that it was just too early. And maybe this is a fun example to end with. So, Zappos, right?
Yes.
Zappos.com. This was the first online shoe store on the internet. And when the founder, Nick Swinmurn, when he had this idea, his biggest assumption, the biggest threat to his idea of creating an online shoe store was his assumption was people are willing to buy shoes online, right? And that's what he had to validate. And so this assumption came from the fact that at that time, people would go to a shoe store, feel the shoe, smell the shoe, see the shoe, try it on, look in a mirror with their current clothing on, etc., and walk around, see how it felt. And translating that to an online store is not doing all these things.
The opposite of all those things.
Nothing. Plus paying for the shoe and not receiving it immediately. That's also done in the store, right? So his biggest assumption was people are willing to buy shoes online. And so his idea to validate that assumption was to go to a local shoe store, take pictures of their inventory, put that inventory on a website. And when someone would buy a shoe off his website, he would go to the store, buy the shoe, pack the shoe, send it to the buyer. And I can imagine this is how I would do it, but create a relationship with that buyer. Like, hey, what made you buy this shoe online? How did I lower the bar for you? How did you find the payment process? Like all these things just to learn about that process. Now, I don't know how many shoes he sold, but I can imagine you have to sell 500 shoes or 100 shoes maybe to get these insights like, hey, is this assumption right? Are people willing to buy shoes online? And I think that's one of the best examples because you could brainstorm for days how to optimize an online shoe store. But if no one wants to buy shoes online, then that whole discussion is not really necessary, basically. And so, yeah, for me, that's one of the best examples of MVP, mindset and the execution on that.
I love that. And my favorite thing too is like what you can almost do is have and I've seen this all the time. I even learned this in business school. And what you could do is you can create your landing page and have a sign up button or have a buy now button if it's a product like shoes. But instead of bringing them to the checkout, you actually take their money, to see if people will actually pay for it. Yeah. But then after they've checked out, your confirmation page should be, hey, thanks for pre-purchasing or something. We don't actually have this product yet. Would you like to have a chat with us? Or don't even, if you don't want to do complete fraud, don't sell something. And on that buy now button, that sign up button, just send them to a form that says, hey, sign up with your name, email, you're interested, and then book a call with the founder. That's what we do. That's the consulting model, right? Yeah. You do a discovery call first. Mm-hmm. Then you see what they want. You do a 30-minute chat. You really get into it. And then you can use those ideas to bring it to the product.
Totally, man. I couldn't agree more.
I think that's it. And one thing before we do go, I want to ask you, what is the one thing that you're really, really excited for in the next maybe 1 to 5 years, whether that's with technology, with some of these ideas, with online education, with no code? What's something that you're really excited about that you can foresee coming?
There's a few things, man. You said education. I actually saw this tweet, I think it was today or yesterday, that Harvard is like putting all their courses online and stuff like that. That really goes to show how broke that model is, because people only go to Harvard basically for the network, and when the network is gone, why would you go to Harvard? And I really believe that, and if there's any young kids, don't listen to me, but you don't really have to go to college. You can learn anything online, anything on any level. And so I really see, that network part is why you should go to college or university, basically. But like for the subject part, I really think that you can give yourself an MBA or some practical, experience by finding stuff online. So I'm excited to see where that's going to go. And I'm also really interested in what they now call the passion economy. Or I saw this Twitter thread from a guy, I can't remember his name, like 2 weeks ago, and he called this hyper freelancing. You should search for that on Twitter. And so basically hyper freelancing, he put a label on what I'm actually doing, which was fun. That's what triggered me. So hyper freelancing is a combination of when you are a freelancer, you're basically offering a service, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're only offering that service and only working for other people, then you're really exchanging your time for money, which, like you said, is the dumbest way to, build wealth. But that's how you start. And so from doing that consulting, that service business, you can derive ideas for products that you can create, right? Like online courses or maybe an ebook or I don't know, let's say if you're a designer, like icon sets or whatever. And so he built hyper freelancing. He illustrated it with a triangle. The top is service, custom service. The middle is educational products, and the bottom is a SaaS product. And yeah, obviously I have an online course, so I'm doing the education part. I have an idea for another online course. I'm already doing the consulting part. Now, luckily, with only people that I also really like, but sometimes you have to just earn money to earn money. And I'm exploring that SaaS part of the triangle, like I mentioned. And so that was a really cool Twitter thread. Yeah, again, just look for hyper freelancing, then you'll find the thread. And he also has this blog post. And I see more and more people moving towards this, right? Like productizing yourself, productizing your service or your experience, your skills into, it may be an educational product or an online productized service. There's guys like Jack Butcher on Twitter or David Perel on Twitter who really have like productized their skills and experience and hobbies into these different types of products and doing really well. And so that's also something that really interests me. Like Jack Butcher says, if you can do it for someone else, his bank account, why not do it for your own, right? Like if you work for a company doing X, you can do that for yourself. And especially now with the whole COVID remote working thing, the on-site stuff is going to matter less. And so, that type of work, productizing yourself, combined with the online education evolving, I'm interested to see where that's going to go. So those are my two subjects that I'm really looking at.
That's awesome. I love it. And where can people find you online? Where can they learn more about you? I know you also have a podcast. So any place online that you want to shout out, go for it, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah. So main place is Twitter. I'm at Bram K. So that's BRAMK. That's where you can also find a link to my course, which is No Code MVP. That link is nocodemvp.com. So that's easy. There's also a link there to my upcoming podcast, which is not that yet live, but it's called Early Ones, where I'm talking with early stage founders about their challenges and how they tackle them. Twitter is the main channel that people can follow me and also reach me. Just DM me. My DMs are open. Or send me an email at now I'm flexing, but I have bram@hey.com. So people can just email me.
Jumped on the hey train, eh?
Totally, man. I'm still figuring it out, but it's just I like these ideas that stir up these old channels. So I just wanted to get on, see what it's like, and then see if it'll suit me. But I have this name for life, so. That's
which
fun.
Is good.
Yeah.
That's great. That is awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for your time. And this was great. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that too. I really enjoyed the convo.